Welcome back, beautiful soul. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you haven't already, and let me be your guide into the most restful sleep. But first, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe so we can meet again tomorrow night. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're resting tonight and what kind of dreams you'd like me to weave for you next. Your sleep journey starts now. The autopsy showed hypothermia, but the bruising around Rebecca Hartwell's wrists told a different story. When I opened her file on January 8, 2011, the temperature logs from the nursing home indicated the heating system had been fully operational that night. Someone had tied a 67-year-old woman to her bed during a Category 3 blizzard and left her by an open window. I'm a forensic pathologist in Duluth, Minnesota, and I've examined over 2,000 bodies in my career. But what I found in Rebecca's case made me question everything about our long-term care system. The official report from Pinewood Manor stated she died peacefully in her sleep during the storm. The funeral had already happened. The family had been told it was natural causes, just an elderly heart giving out during the stress of the blizzard. But bodies don't lie. Rebecca had been a school teacher for 42 years. Her daughter, Susan Yao, showed me photographs of a vibrant woman who volunteered at the library every Tuesday, who knitted blankets for premature babies at the hospital. Rebecca had early-stage dementia, but was otherwise healthy. She'd only been at Pinewood Manor for 6 months. The storm hit on January 4th at 11:15 p.m. Wind speeds reached 73 miles per hour. Visibility dropped to 0. The facility went into lockdown protocol. According to the nursing logs, Rebecca was checked at 10:45 p.m. and was resting comfortably. At 6:30 a.m., when the day shift arrived, they found her cold in her bed. Room temperature was 41 degrees. The window was open 18 inches. Snow had drifted onto the floor. The attending physician, Dr. Gerald Thornton, signed the death certificate without requesting an autopsy. Cause of death, cardiac arrest due to hypothermia. Accidental. But when I examined her body 3 days later, Susan had insisted on an autopsy after finding unexplained charges on her mother's credit card. I found ligature marks, fresh ones, made within hours of death. I documented everything, photographed the marks from 12 angles, measured their depth and width, collected tissue samples showing cellular damage consistent with restraints. The marks matched standard hospital bed rails, the kind with foam padding that leaves distinctive patterns. I called the police. Detective Lynn Morrison took my report and promised to investigate. 2 days later, she told me the nursing home's surveillance system had malfunctioned during the storm. All footage from January 4th was corrupted. The backup generator had failed. Nothing was recoverable. I pressed harder. I interviewed the night staff. The nurse on duty, Patricia Valdez, had worked at Pinewood for 11 years. She claimed she never restrained residents without doctor's orders. She'd checked Rebecca at 10:45 p.m. and the patient was fine. She heard nothing unusual during her rounds. But I found Rebecca's medical chart. Someone had administered 4 milligrams of Ativan at 10:30 p.m. There was no doctor's order. Patricia's initials were on the medication log, but when I showed her the entry, her hands started shaking. She said she didn't remember giving any sedative that night. I went deeper. I requested 5 years of death records from Pinewood Manor. The facility averaged 6.2 deaths per year. But during major winter storms over the past 3 years, that number jumped to 4.7 deaths per storm event. In a facility housing only 48 residents, that was statistically impossible unless something systematic was happening. I found 12 cases, 12 elderly residents who died during severe weather events, all ruled natural causes, all cremated within 72 hours, no autopsies performed. I recognized Dr. Thornton's signature on every death certificate. On February 3rd, I presented my findings to the State Medical Board. I had documentation, photographs, statistical analysis, and Rebecca's body as proof. I requested they investigate Pinewood Manor for potential involuntary euthanasia protocols. The board thanked me for my diligence and promised a full review. 1 week later, I was fired. The hospital administration cited budget restructuring. My position was eliminated. My cases were reassigned. My access to the county morgue was revoked effective immediately. 23 years of service ended with a security guard escorting me out. Rebecca's case was closed. The detective stopped returning my calls. Susan tried to file a wrongful death lawsuit, but 3 attorneys refused to take the case. One told her privately that Pinewood Manor's parent company, Northern Healthcare Systems, had connections throughout the state judiciary. I learned later that Dr. Thornton received a promotion. He's now Northern Healthcare Systems Regional Medical Director, overseeing 43 facilities across Minnesota and Wisconsin. I still have copies of everything: the photographs, the tissue samples, the statistical analysis. I keep them in a safety deposit box in a bank 3 towns away. I've tried contacting the FBI, the State Attorney General, and every investigative journalist I could find. No one will touch it. Pinewood Manor is still operating. They have a 4-star rating on senior care websites. Their brochure promises compassionate end-of-life care during difficult circumstances. Families trust them with their parents and grandparents. Last winter, during the February blizzard, 4 residents died there in a single night. All natural causes, all cremated immediately. If you had a family member at Pinewood Manor during a winter storm between 2008 and 2011, contact me. If you questioned the circumstances of their death but were told it was natural, contact me. If you were told the surveillance system malfunctioned or records were lost, contact me. Rebecca Hartwell deserves justice. So do the others. The truth is buried under procedure and paperwork and corporate protection, but I documented everything, and I'm not going to stop until someone listens. The abandoned car had been buried under 8 feet of snow for 41 days before the plows found it. When state troopers opened the door on March 19, 2006, they discovered something that made no sense. Thomas Brennan's body was in the back seat, not the front. His hands were bound behind his back with industrial zip ties. The official report claimed he'd gotten disoriented during the blizzard and died of exposure while trying to keep warm. I was the lead investigator on his case, and I knew that explanation was bullshit the moment I saw the crime scene photographs. You don't zip-tie yourself and climb into a back seat to die. Thomas was a wildlife biologist working for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. He'd been researching wolf populations in the Brooks Range, documenting illegal hunting activities near protected areas. On February 6th at 4:47 p.m., he radioed his supervisor that he was heading back to Fairbanks. The weather report predicted light snow, nothing severe. He never arrived. His wife, Anna Kowalski, reported him missing at 11:30 p.m. Search and rescue couldn't launch until the storm passed. By then, temperatures had dropped to 43 below zero. Wind chills hit 70 below. The Dalton Highway, mile after empty mile, became impassable. When we finally located his vehicle at mile marker 187, everything felt wrong. His GPS showed he'd stopped there at 6:23 p.m. The car's engine was cold. Fuel tank was 3/4 full. No mechanical problems, no reason to stop in that location. It wasn't a rest area or pull-off point, just a random spot on a desolate highway. The zip ties were the kind used in commercial fishing operations. Thick, reinforced, rated for 175 pounds. Thomas weighed 168 pounds. He couldn't have broken free. But more disturbing was what we found in his field notebook, recovered from the front passenger seat. The last entry, dated February 6th at 5:15 p.m., read, "Confirmed, 3 trucks, unmarked, loading wolf carcasses near Atigun Pass. Counted at least 20 animals. Getting photos. Plates registered to Yukon Logistics. Same company from December incident. His camera was missing. So was his laptop. His satellite phone was in the glove compartment, battery removed. I ran the company name. Yukon Logistics was a freight and supply contractor with exclusive rights to transport equipment for the oil pipeline. The owner, Marcus Drummond, had been investigated twice for wildlife violations but never charged. He had powerful connections: state senators, oil executives, federal regulators. I interviewed the last person who'd seen Thomas alive, a truck driver named Henry Volkov, who'd passed mile marker 187 around 6:15 p.m. He remembered seeing Thomas's vehicle with its hazards on. Another truck was parked behind it, a white F-350 with commercial plates. Two men were talking to Thomas through his driver's window. Henry didn't stop. The storm was intensifying, and he needed to reach Coldfoot before the highway closed. But he was certain about what he saw. Thomas was alive, talking to two men, and another vehicle was present. That white F-350 never appeared in any official report. State troopers claimed no other vehicles were in the area that night. Highway camera footage from the nearest checkpoint, 37 miles south, was unavailable due to weather-related equipment failure. I pushed harder. I traced Yukon Logistics vehicle registrations and found they owned 4 white F-350 trucks. I requested their GPS logs for February 6th. The company refused, citing proprietary business information. I got a warrant. A judge signed it on April 3rd. Before I could execute the warrant, I was reassigned. My captain told me the case was being transferred to the Alaska Bureau of Investigation. Possible federal jurisdiction issues. Wildlife crimes potentially involved. I needed to hand over all files immediately. I refused. I told him Thomas was murdered, and I could prove it. I had witnessed testimony, physical evidence of restraints, and a clear motive involving illegal wolf poaching worth tens of thousands on the black market. 3 days later, I was suspended. Internal Affairs claimed I'd mishandled evidence in an unrelated case from 18 months prior. I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. My badge and weapon were confiscated. My access to the evidence database was terminated. Thomas's case was officially closed on April 28, 2006. Cause of death: accidental hypothermia due to vehicle breakdown during severe weather conditions. The zip ties were never mentioned in the final report. Neither was the missing camera or the witness statement about the white F-350. Anna tried to fight it. She hired a private investigator who disappeared after 3 weeks. Literally vanished. His office was cleared out, his phone disconnected. His family claimed he'd moved to Seattle for a new job, but his Seattle address didn't exist. The Internal Affairs investigation against me dragged on for 14 months. I was eventually cleared of all charges, but by then, my reputation was destroyed. No department would hire me. I lost my pension eligibility. My marriage fell apart. Marcus Drummond sold Yukon Logistics in 2008 for $8.7 million and retired to Arizona. The wolf poaching in the Brooks Range stopped immediately after Thomas died. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game shut down that research program entirely, citing budget constraints. I still have Thomas's field notebook. I kept a copy before turning over the files. Every entry documents systematic wildlife crimes. Dates, locations, vehicle descriptions, estimated numbers. His last investigation identified a trafficking network moving wolf pelts to Asia through Vancouver. He was killed because he got too close to the truth, and everyone who could have helped him looked the other way. If you were traveling the Dalton Highway on February 6, 2006, between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., and you saw anything unusual near mile marker 187, I need to hear from you. If you worked for Yukon Logistics and know what happened that night, contact me. Your identity can be protected. Thomas Brennan was murdered and left to freeze because he tried to protect wildlife from criminals with powerful friends. His wife still waits for real answers. So do I. The hospital generator failed at 2:17 a.m., and by 2:45 a.m., 3 patients were dead. But when I reviewed the evacuation logs from January 22, 2013, I discovered those 3 names had never been on the transfer list. Someone had deliberately left them behind when the blizzard hit, and the power failure had provided perfect cover. I'm a hospital administrator, and I've managed emergency protocols for 17 years. What happened at Mercy Regional during the ice storm wasn't an accident. It was selection. The storm warning came at 9 a.m. on January 21st. The National Weather Service predicted catastrophic ice accumulation, power outages lasting up to a week, and temperatures dropping to 18 below zero. Our emergency management team activated the evacuation protocol at 10:30 a.m. We had 19 hours to transfer 42 patients to facilities outside the impact zone. Standard procedure requires evacuating patients based on medical acuity. Critical care first, stable patients last. Every patient gets transferred. No exceptions. I've executed this protocol 6 times, and we've never left anyone behind. But this time, someone changed the list. I discovered it while reviewing the evacuation manifest 3 days after the storm. We'd transferred 39 patients. 3 remained. Daniel Kozlov, 71, awaiting discharge after hip surgery. Margaret Chen, 56, being treated for complications from diabetes. And Angela Morrison, 44, recovering from a car accident with minor injuries. All 3 were stable, conscious, and capable of transport. All 3 should have been on the first evacuation wave. Instead, they were marked as declined transport, a designation requiring signed refusal forms and witness documentation. Those forms didn't exist. I interviewed the nursing staff. Night Supervisor Karen Wright told me she'd been given the final evacuation list at 11 p.m. on January 21st by the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Preston Hughes. The list had 39 names. She asked about the 3 patients remaining in the East Wing, and Dr. Hughes told her they'd signed refusal forms and insisted on staying. But I found the actual refusal forms in the medical records department. They were blank, never signed, never witnessed, never processed. At 2:17 a.m., the ice brought down power lines throughout the county. Our backup generator kicked in immediately, as designed. But at 2:32 a.m., someone manually shut it down. The fuel valve was turned to the closed position. Security footage showed Dr. Hughes entering the generator room at 2:28 a.m. He was inside for 6 minutes. Without power, the temperature in the East Wing dropped 11 degrees in the first hour. Heating, ventilation, and all monitoring equipment failed. The emergency lighting lasted 40 minutes before the batteries died. Daniel Kozlov died at 2:45 a.m. His heart condition, previously stable, couldn't handle the sudden cold and stress. Margaret Chen died at 3:10 a.m. when her insulin pump failed, and no one could reach her in the dark. Angela Morrison died at 3:33 a.m. from what the autopsy later called complications from hypothermia. When the generator was restarted at 4:05 a.m., after I physically went down there and found it manually disabled, the damage was done. I confronted Dr. Hughes that morning. He claimed he'd gone to check the generator because he heard unusual noises. He said the valve must have been accidentally bumped. He denied everything about the evacuation list and the missing refusal forms. I pulled his financial records. It took me 3 weeks and a private investigator, but I found the connection. All 3 patients who died had filed malpractice complaints against Dr. Hughes within the previous 18 months. Daniel Kozlov's surgery had been botched. Hughes had operated on the wrong hip initially and had to perform a second surgery to correct it. Margaret Chen had developed severe complications after Hughes prescribed the wrong medication dosage, resulting in kidney damage. Angela Morrison's car accident injuries had been misdiagnosed by Hughes in the emergency room. She'd spent 4 days in agony before another doctor discovered her fractured pelvis. All 3 had attorneys, All three had cases pending. All three would have testified against him, and all three died during a storm that provided perfect, plausible deniability. I reported everything to the State Medical Board on February 15, 2013. I provided documentation, the altered evacuation list, the blank refusal forms, the security footage showing Hughes in the generator room, the financial connections to the malpractice suits. The board opened an investigation. It lasted 8 months. On October 3, 2013, they issued their findings: insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Dr. Hughes had been performing his duties during a chaotic emergency situation. The generator malfunction was attributed to equipment stress during the storm. The evacuation list discrepancy was blamed on clerical errors during the emergency. The missing refusal forms were explained as documentation failures, common during crisis situations. Case closed. No charges filed. No license suspension. I was terminated on October 10, 2013. The hospital board cited loss of confidence in leadership capabilities and failure to maintain appropriate emergency protocols. My 20-year career ended with a severance package contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't sign it. Dr. Preston Hughes is still practicing medicine. He's now chief of surgery at Mercy Regional, overseeing a staff of 42 doctors. The hospital gave him an award last year for excellence in patient care. The families of Daniel Kozlov, Margaret Chen, and Angela Morrison tried to file wrongful death lawsuits. All three were dismissed on technicalities. Their attorneys told them the evidence was circumstantial, and no jury would convict based on suspicions during a natural disaster. I still have everything. The evacuation lists with handwritten alterations, the blank refusal forms, the security footage showing exactly when Hughes entered that generator room and exactly how long he stayed. The timeline proving those patients died because someone turned off their life support manually. If you were at Mercy Regional Hospital during the January 2013 ice storm and saw anything unusual, contact me. If you worked there and were told to keep quiet about what happened that night, contact me. If you know something about how that evacuation list was changed or why those 3 patients were left behind, contact me. 3 people died because they dared to hold a doctor accountable, and he's still treating patients today. The supply helicopter found the ranger station on March 8, 2009, 73 days after the last radio contact. When they opened the door, they discovered 2 bodies and a detailed journal explaining exactly what had happened. But the Park Service sealed that journal and ruled both deaths accidental. I know because I'm the pilot who found them, and I read every page before they took it away. Jacob Thornburg and Melissa Ruiz were wilderness rangers stationed at Remote Peak in Wyoming's Wind River Range. They'd been there since October, monitoring wildlife and maintaining the backcountry trails. The winter storm hit on December 23rd at 7:15 p.m., a freak weather system that dumped 11 feet of snow in 48 hours and cut off all access to their station. Their last radio transmission came at 10:22 a.m. on December 26th. Jacob reported they were secure, had adequate supplies, and would wait out the storm. Standard protocol, nothing concerning. But when I landed that helicopter 11 weeks later, the scene inside told a different story. Jacob's body was in the main room, slumped over the radio desk. Single gunshot wound to the head. His service weapon was on the floor beside him. Melissa's body was in the back storage room, also shot, also with Jacob's weapon. The medical examiner later determined Jacob shot Melissa first, then himself. Murder-suicide during isolation. Induced psychosis, that was the official conclusion. Cabin fever driven by extreme confinement and stress. Case closed within 3 weeks. But I'd read the journal before the Park Service investigators arrived. I'd sat in that frozen station waiting for them. And I'd read every entry Jacob made during those 73 days. And what he documented wasn't madness. It was murder. The journal started normally. December 23rd, storm arrival, securing the station, inventory checks. December 24th through January 2nd, routine observations, maintenance tasks, weather monitoring. They played cards, read books, discussed their families. Nothing unusual. January 3rd, 10:15 a.m., Jacob wrote about hearing a helicopter. Not a Park Service helicopter. Those had been grounded since December the 28th due to weather. This was different, flying low, circling their area for approximately 30 minutes before moving south toward the restricted watershed zone. The watershed zone had been closed to all access since 2007. Congressional designation, protected aquifer serving 40,000 people downstream. Absolutely no development, no mining, no resource extraction permitted. Rangers were specifically instructed to report any activity in that zone immediately. Jacob tried to radio it in. The transmission didn't go through. He tried 6 more times over the next 3 hours. Equipment malfunction, he assumed. He documented everything in the journal instead. Helicopter description, approximate time, flight path, duration. January 5th, 2:30 p.m. He heard drilling. Faint but unmistakable. Mechanical drilling sounds echoing through the mountains from the direction of the watershed zone. He and Melissa discussed snowshoeing the 8 miles to investigate, but the weather made it impossible. Visibility was near zero, temperature 41 below, avalanche danger extreme. The drilling continued for 16 days. Every morning, starting around 7 a.m., stopping around 5 p.m., Jacob documented it all. He tried the radio constantly. Nothing worked. He suspected it wasn't malfunction. Someone was jamming their frequency. January 22nd. The drilling stopped. That afternoon, the helicopter returned, made 4 trips over 6 hours, flying low toward the watershed zone each time, then departing southeast. Heavy cargo, based on the engine strain Jacob could hear. January 23rd. The radio suddenly worked again. Crystal clear transmission. Jacob immediately reported everything to the district supervisor. Unauthorized helicopter activity, drilling operations in the protected watershed, possible illegal resource extraction. The supervisor, Richard Maines, told him to stand by. Someone would investigate after the weather cleared. January 29th. Another helicopter, different from the previous ones. It landed directly at the ranger station. 2 men got out. They weren't Park Service. They wore civilian clothing, no badges, no identification. They asked Jacob about what he'd reported. He told them everything. They asked for the journal. He refused. It was official documentation of a federal crime. They left after 20 minutes. Jacob wrote that their visit felt like a threat assessment, not an investigation. February 4th. The radio died again. Permanently this time. Jacob suspected it had been sabotaged during the visit, just not obviously enough to prove it. February 11th. Melissa found something while checking the perimeter, a small drilling core sample partially buried in snow about 50 yards from the station. Jacob recognized it immediately. Uranium ore. High grade, valuable, and completely illegal to extract from a protected watershed. He photographed it, documented the exact location, sealed it in a sample bag with proper chain of custody protocols. He wrote in the journal that this was proof of federal crimes. Illegal mining, environmental violations, theft of resources from protected lands. He estimated the operation had extracted thousands of pounds based on the helicopter trips and drilling duration. February 18th. They heard snowmobiles approaching. In that weather, that terrain, the only people with equipment capable of reaching them were people who didn't want to be found. Jacob hid the uranium sample inside a box of freeze-dried food. He told Melissa to deny everything if questioned. 3 men arrived, same ones from January 29th, plus a third. They searched the station, tore through everything. Asked repeatedly about samples, photographs, documentation. Jacob said he'd reported what he heard, but had no physical evidence. They didn't believe him. The men stayed 2 hours. They took the journal. Jacob was writing in a second notebook by then, hidden under his mattress. They damaged the emergency beacon. They told Jacob and Melissa that rescue wouldn't come until late March due to budget constraints and ongoing weather conditions. That was February 18th, 20 days before I found them. The final entry was dated March 1st. Jacob wrote, "They're coming back. Melissa and I discussed options. If they kill us, it looks like isolation psychosis or an accident. If we survive to testify, we expose a federal crime worth millions. We're keeping the sample hidden. If someone finds this, the uranium core is in the chicken soup box, northwest corner of storage room. The drilling site is at coordinates 432847 degree on, 109.7392 degree E. Richard Maines knew everything and did nothing. The helicopter was registered to Summit Resource Partners, subsidiary of Continental Mining Corp. They've been extracting uranium from the protected watershed since at least December 2008. We documented everything. When I found them on March 8th, I read the hidden journal first. Then I found the uranium sample exactly where Jacob said it would be. I photographed everything with my phone before the investigators arrived. They confiscated the journal immediately. They took my phone, said they needed it for evidence processing. I never got it back. They returned a different phone with all my photos deleted. The uranium sample disappeared from the evidence log. The drilling site coordinates were never investigated. The official report stated no journal was found, only routine station logs. Jacob and Melissa died from psychological breakdown during extreme isolation. The case generated no media coverage, no public inquiry. I was grounded for 6 months, mandatory psychological evaluation after discovering a traumatic scene. When I returned to flying, I was transferred to a different district. I was told explicitly never to discuss what I'd found at Remote Peak. Richard Maines retired in 2010 with full benefits. Continental Mining Corp continues operating throughout Wyoming. Summit Resource Partners was dissolved in 2011, but their assets were acquired by subsidiaries that still exist today. I kept copies of 3 journal pages. I'd shoved them inside my jacket before the investigators catalogued everything. They document the helicopter activity, the drilling sounds, and the coordinates of the illegal mining operation. If you worked for Continental Mining or Summit Resource Partners in 2008-2009, contact me. If you know anything about uranium extraction operations in the Wind River Range, contact me. If you were told to keep quiet about activities in the protected watershed zone, contact me. Jacob Thornburg and Melissa Ruiz died trying to protect federal land from corporate theft. They documented crimes, gathered evidence, and were murdered for it. The truth is buried with them, along with the fortune in uranium that was illegally extracted and the environmental damage that was never assessed. I'm still flying. Still working for the Park Service, and I'm still waiting for someone with authority to give a damn about what really happened at Remote Peak. The truck was supposed to arrive in Anchorage by 8 p.m. on February 15, 2007. When it didn't, and the driver didn't answer his radio, dispatch assumed weather delays. They found his rig 3 days later at an abandoned rest stop, engine running, heater on, trailer doors wide open. The cargo, 43,000 pounds of medical supplies destined for rural Alaska villages, was gone. So was the driver, Chris Bennett. The insurance company paid out $2.3 million. Case closed as theft during extreme weather. Except I was the logistics coordinator who'd planned that route, and I knew something nobody wanted to admit. Chris Bennett didn't just vanish with valuable cargo. He was transporting something else, something worth killing for and burying under a convenient blizzard story. Chris had driven for Arctic Transport for 9 years. Perfect safety record, Never late, never complained. He was 41 years old, married with 2 kids in Juneau. He knew every mile of the Alcan Highway better than anyone I'd ever worked with. The load was standard: antibiotics, insulin, surgical supplies, and emergency medications for 15 villages in the western Alaska region. We'd shipped identical loads every 6 weeks for 2 years. Nothing special. Nothing controversial. Except this time, 3 days before departure, I received instructions from our corporate office in Seattle to add a last-minute shipment to Chris's trailer. It came through emergency channels, classified federal medical supplies requiring immediate delivery to a research facility near Nome. The paperwork listed it as temperature-sensitive biologicals with a customs code I'd never seen before. I questioned it. My supervisor, Donald Fraser, told me to shut up and load it. The extra cargo came with a $50,000 expedite fee paid directly by the Department of Defense. He said the company needed the money, and I needed to stop asking questions. The shipment arrived at 11 p.m. on February 13th. Military transport, 4 sealed containers, each about 3 feet square, marked with biohazard symbols and handling instructions in languages I didn't recognize. 2 men in civilian clothes supervised the loading. They didn't give names. They made Chris sign a security agreement before they'd release the containers. Chris called me at 11:47 p.m. that night. He said something felt wrong. The containers were cold, not freezer cold, but cold in a way that made the metal hurt to touch. They hummed. Not mechanical humming, but a frequency he could feel in his chest. He asked if I knew what he was really carrying. I told him the truth. I didn't know. I'd been ordered to facilitate the transport without questions. He said he'd make the delivery, but he was documenting everything. He took photos of the containers, the paperwork, the 2 men who'd supervised the loading. He sent them to his personal email as backup. He left on February 14th at 6:20 a.m. Weather was clear initially. The forecast called for light snow starting around 3 p.m. near the Canadian border. Nothing serious. He checked in every 2 hours as required. 8:15 a.m. at mile marker 45, 10:30 a.m. at mile marker 128, 12:45 p.m. approaching the border crossing. His last radio transmission came at 2:58 p.m. He reported he was being followed. 2 vehicles, black SUVs, had been behind him since the border. They'd passed him twice, then fallen back, then passed again. He said one of them had pulled alongside him at mile marker 247 and the passenger had photographed his truck. I told him to pull over at the next populated area and wait. He said the nearest town was 43 miles ahead and the vehicles were boxing him in. Then his radio went dead. I tried reaching him for the next 6 hours. Nothing. At 9:15 p.m. I called Alaska State Troopers to report a missing commercial vehicle. They said they'd send someone when the weather cleared. The light snow had turned into a full blizzard with 0 visibility. They found his truck on February 18th at an abandoned rest stop near mile marker 289. Engine running, fuel tank half full, heat on maximum, driver's door unlocked, keys in the ignition. No sign of Chris. No sign of the cargo, medical supplies, or mysterious federal containers. The trailer doors were open. The lock had been cut with professional tools. Everything was gone. Even the straps and pallets. Someone had cleaned it out completely. State troopers treated it as a theft investigation. They assumed Chris had been forced out by the weather and someone had stolen the cargo while he sought shelter. They searched the surrounding area for 3 days. Nothing. No tracks, no evidence, no body. Chris had vanished. I told them about the federal containers and the SUVs following him. They looked at me like I was crazy. There was no record of any federal shipment. The customs paperwork I'd filed had been deleted from the system. The $50,000 expedite fee had been reversed. Our corporate accounting department claimed it never happened. I still had copies. I'd learned to keep backups of everything after 15 years in logistics. I showed them the shipping manifests, the special handling instructions, the payment authorization. They said they'd investigate. 2 weeks later, a federal agent visited me at my office. He didn't show identification. He said the containers I'd mentioned were classified materials related to ongoing national security operations. My discussion of them with local police had violated federal law. If I continued talking about the shipment, I'd face prosecution under the Espionage Act. He left me a business card with a phone number. He said if I remembered anything else about February 14th, I should call that number and only that number. Not the police, not the media, not Chris's family. I called the number once. It was disconnected. Donald Fraser, my supervisor, retired suddenly in March 2007. Arctic Transport gave him a $200,000 severance package for his years of dedicated service. He moved to Costa Rica and hasn't returned to the United States. The insurance company paid out $2.3 million for the stolen cargo in April 2007. Chris Bennett was declared legally dead in February 2010. His wife, Sandra, received his life insurance and a settlement from Arctic Transport that required her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I tried to access Chris's personal email account to retrieve the photos he'd sent himself. The account had been deleted. The email service provider claimed it had never existed. I was fired from Arctic Transport in June 2007 for performance issues. I've worked 5 different logistics jobs since then. Every time I mention my previous experience with Arctic Transport, I get calls asking me not to discuss certain deliveries. My phones have been tapped 3 times that I know of. My apartment was broken into twice, but nothing was stolen. Just searched. I still have the paperwork. The shipping manifests with customs codes that don't exist in any database I can find. Payment authorizations for federal agencies that deny any involvement. Handling instructions for materials that officially were never transported. If you worked for Arctic Transport in 2007 and know what those containers really were, contact me. If you were stationed near Nome in February 2007 and saw unusual military activity, contact me. If you know what happened to Chris Bennett, contact me. He disappeared because he was carrying something someone couldn't afford to have documented, and I'm the only person left who's willing to say that out loud. Whatever was in those containers was worth $2.3 million in insurance fraud, worth a man's life, and worth enough government resources to erase every trace of its existence. Chris Bennett's family deserves to know what happened to him. So do the rest of us. The avalanche struck at 3:42 p.m. on January 11, 2015, burying the north face of Summit Ridge Resort under 40 feet of snow. The official report blamed natural conditions, heavy snowpack, warming temperatures, and unstable layers. But I was the avalanche safety director who'd been ordering that slope closed for 6 weeks, and I'd been overruled every single time by management. When I tried to testify about the negligence that killed 4 people, I was fired and threatened with legal action. My name is Olivia Saunders, and I've been analyzing avalanche risk for 19 years. I've worked at 11 ski resorts across 3 countries. I know how to read snowpack stability, how to assess terrain risk, and how to protect people. What happened at Summit Ridge wasn't an accident. It was corporate manslaughter disguised as natural disaster. The trouble started in early December 2014. We'd received unusual snowfall patterns, heavy wet snow followed by cold snaps, creating distinct weak layers in the snowpack. I documented it all in my daily reports. On December 8th, I performed stability tests on the north face and got terrifying results. The weak layer was fracturing at minimal force. That slope should have been closed immediately. I submitted my recommendation to the resort director, Paul Sanderson. He denied it. The north face contained 5 of our most popular expert runs. Closing them during peak Christmas season would cost an estimated $380,000 in lost revenue. He told me to manage the risk with additional avalanche control work. I explained that avalanche control, using explosives to trigger smaller, controlled slides, wasn't sufficient for the conditions we were facing. The weak layer was too deep and too unstable. We needed to close the terrain until the snowpack consolidated naturally. He told me if I couldn't do my job, he'd find someone who could. I documented everything. I sent emails to the resort's corporate parent company, Northern Peaks Management. I copied the local ski patrol director, Marcus Webb, on every report. I created detailed maps showing exactly which slopes were dangerous and why. On December 29th, I performed another round of stability tests. The weak layer had gotten worse. I found evidence of recent natural slides on similar aspects in the back country. I submitted an urgent report recommending immediate closure of the north face and adjacent terrain. Paul Sanderson called me into his office. He had the resort's attorney present. They told me my constant alarmism was affecting staff morale and guest confidence. They showed me a performance review they'd fabricated, claiming I'd been late to work, missed safety meetings, and failed to properly maintain equipment. None of it was true. They gave me a choice: stop pushing for the closures, or face disciplinary action up to and including termination. I kept pushing. On January 5th, I brought in an independent avalanche consultant, Dr. Elena Martinez, from the American Avalanche Association. She performed her own assessment and confirmed everything I'd been saying. She put it in writing. The north face should be closed immediately, and the resort was operating outside acceptable safety standards. Paul Sanderson refused to even read her report. He told me Dr. Martinez wasn't familiar with our specific terrain and her assessment wasn't relevant. On January 9th, I sent a formal notice to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, documenting the dangerous conditions and the resort's refusal to address them. I didn't know what else to do. People were skiing terrain that could kill them. January 11th was a beautiful day. Clear skies, 28 degrees, light wind, perfect skiing conditions. The north face was packed with skiers. Over 200 people spread across 5 runs. I was in the patrol building when I heard the fracture, that distinctive crack boom sound that every avalanche professional dreads. I ran outside and saw the entire north face sliding. The fracture line was 3 feet deep and over 800 feet wide, millions of pounds of snow moving at 70 miles per hour. 4 people died. Jennifer Walsh, 34, a teacher from Denver, her husband, Kevin Walsh, 37, an engineer, Lisa Kim, 29, a nurse from Boulder, and David Hutchins, 48, a software developer from Fort Collins. 12 others were injured, 6 critically. The rescue operation lasted 9 hours. The investigation started immediately. The National Ski Areas Association sent a team. The county sheriff's office opened a criminal inquiry. The media descended. I testified to investigators. I provided every document I'd created: stability tests, closure recommendations, emails to management, Dr. Martinez's independent assessment, my reports to the Avalanche Center. I laid out exactly how many times I'd warned about the risk and exactly how many times I'd been overruled. 3 days later, I was fired. Summit Ridge claimed I'd violated company policy by discussing internal matters with outside investigators. They said I'd breached confidentiality agreements and damaged the resort's reputation. Their official statement to the media blamed the avalanche on unprecedented weather conditions that could not have been reasonably predicted. They claimed their safety protocols had been fully adequate, and the incident was a tragic natural disaster. They never mentioned that I'd been trying to close that terrain for 6 weeks. They never mentioned Dr. Martinez's report. They never mentioned that corporate profits had been prioritized over guest safety. The families of the victims filed wrongful death lawsuits. I agreed to testify on their behalf. Before the cases went to trial, Summit Ridge's attorneys approached me with a settlement offer, $175,000 in exchange for my silence. I would sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing me from discussing anything related to the resort, the avalanche, or the events leading up to it. I refused. They increased the offer to $300,000, then $450,000. They told me if I testified, they would countersue me for defamation, tortious interference, and breach of contract. They would destroy my reputation in the industry. They would make sure I never worked avalanche safety again. I testified anyway. I brought every document I had. I explained exactly how the resort had ignored repeated warnings about a known hazard. The jury never heard my testimony. The judge ruled it inadmissible. My employment had been terminated, making me a disgruntled former employee with credibility issues. My documentation was dismissed as subjective professional opinions, not rising to the level of definitive proof. Summit Ridge settled all 4 wrongful death cases out of court for undisclosed amounts. The families were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. They can't discuss what they learned or what they were paid. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center concluded the avalanche was caused by natural snowpack instability. Summit Ridge received no citations, no fines, no sanctions. They updated their safety protocols and increased their insurance coverage. Paul Sanderson is still the resort director. He received a bonus that year for managing the crisis professionally. Northern Peaks Management promoted him to Regional Operations Director in 2017. He now oversees safety protocols at 8 ski resorts across 3 states. I haven't worked in avalanche safety since January 2015. I was blacklisted. No resort will hire me. When potential employers call my former supervisors for references, they're told I'm difficult to work with and overly cautious to the point of irrationality. I kept everything. All my reports, all my emails, all my stability test results. Dr. Martinez's independent assessment. The timeline showing exactly when I warned about the danger and exactly when management ignored those warnings. If you worked at Summit Ridge in winter 2014, 2015 and witnessed management decisions regarding the North Face, contact me. If you're a ski patrol member who was told to keep quiet about safety concerns, contact me. If you're a family member of Jennifer Walsh, Kevin Walsh, Lisa Kim, or David Hutchins and want to know the full truth about what happened, contact me. 4 people died because a corporation chose revenue over safety. Their deaths were preventable, predictable, and entirely the result of negligence. And the people responsible are still making safety decisions for thousands of skiers every day. The Coast Guard found the trawler drifting 43 miles off the coast of Nome on March 23, 2010. 3 of the 5 crew members were dead, frozen in their bunks. The other 2, Captain Ivan Petrov and deckhand Samuel Torres, were incoherent and suffering severe frostbite. The official report concluded the boat's heating system had failed during a storm and the captain had been too impaired by hypothermia to radio for help. But I was the Coast Guard medic who treated the survivors, and what Samuel told me in the hospital before federal agents arrived and took him into custody revealed something far more sinister than equipment failure. The Arctic Dawn was a 70-foot fishing trawler operating out of Dutch Harbor. Captain Petrov had run her for 16 years, primarily harvesting crab and cod. Legitimate operation. Proper permits, no violations. The crew that winter consisted of Petrov, Torres, and 3 others, Vincent Drake, 42, Nathan Cole, 37, and Yuki Tanaka, 28, all experienced fishermen. They'd left port on March 18th for what was supposed to be a 5-day fishing run. Weather forecast was typical for that time of year, cold but manageable. Nothing unusual in the departure logs. When we boarded the Arctic Dawn on March 23rd, the scene was wrong in every way. The heating system wasn't just failed, it had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone had removed the fuel pump and thrown it overboard. We found the mounting bolts cut cleanly with power tools. Vincent Drake, Nathan Cole, and Yuki Tanaka were in their bunks, dead from hypothermia. But they'd also been drugged. Toxicology reports later showed massive doses of sedatives in their systems, enough to render them unconscious for hours. Someone had drugged them, disabled the heat, and left them to freeze. Captain Petrov was found on the bridge, barely alive. He'd suffered a severe head injury, blunt force trauma to the left temple. His blood alcohol level was 32, more than enough to explain his failure to call for help. Except Petrov had been sober for 14 years. His crew knew it. His family knew it. The entire fishing community in Dutch Harbor knew Ivan Petrov didn't drink. Samuel Torres was the only conscious survivor when we arrived. He was locked in the engine room, hypothermic but alive. The door had been barricaded from the outside. He'd survived because the engine compartment retained residual heat longer than the rest of the vessel. The hospital, before the sedatives fully took effect, Samuel told me what really happened. On March 19th, around 8:00 p.m., they'd come across something in the water, a large cargo container, unmarked, floating about 90 miles off course from any shipping lane. Captain Petrov decided to investigate. Salvage rights could be valuable, and the container looked new, expensive. They hauled it aboard. It took 3 hours and all 5 men working together. The container was sealed with locks they didn't recognize. Electronic, sophisticated, nothing a fishing trawler should encounter. Against Samuel's advice, Captain Petrov cut the locks. Inside were smaller cases, 23 of them, each about 2 feet square, made of aluminum, marked with Cyrillic letters and biohazard symbols. Samuel said Yuki recognized the symbols. He'd worked in medical supply before becoming a fisherman. He told them the cases contained radioactive materials, probably medical isotopes or possibly weapons components. He said they needed to report it immediately and stay away from the cases. Instead, Vincent Drake opened one. Inside were small lead containers, each holding vials of clear liquid. No labels in English. No documentation. But Drake recognized their value. Whatever this was, it was expensive and illegal, and they'd just found 23 cases of it. Drake wanted to take it all back to port and sell it. Petrov said they had to report it. Salvaging illegal cargo was a federal crime. They argued for 2 hours. The crew split. Drake and Cole wanted to sell it. Petrov, Torres, and Tanaka wanted to report it. Around 11:30 p.m., Drake made coffee for everyone. Within 20 minutes, Petrov, Torres, and Tanaka were unconscious. Drake had crushed sedatives into their cups. He'd brought them on board specifically for this purpose, Samuel realized later. Drake had known about the cargo. He'd known it would be floating there. This had been planned. When Samuel woke up, he was in the engine room, and the temperature was dropping. He heard Drake and Cole on the deck above, moving equipment, working fast. He tried the door, locked from outside. He heard Drake and Cole arguing. Cole was having second thoughts. He wanted to wake Petrov, get everyone warm, deal with the consequences. Drake refused. He said Petrov would report them all, and they'd spend 20 years in federal prison. Samuel heard a struggle. Then a gunshot. Then Cole's body hit the deck. Drake came to the engine room door. He told Samuel through the metal that this was nothing personal. The cargo was worth $4 million to the people who'd hired him to retrieve it. He'd already lost Cole. Too weak, too guilty. He couldn't risk Samuel or the others waking up and interfering. Drake was leaving them all to freeze. He was taking the cargo and the ship's life raft. A pickup boat would meet him 12 miles south. The Arctic dawn would be found eventually, looking like a tragic heating failure during a storm. No evidence, no investigation, just another fishing accident in dangerous waters. Samuel heard Drake loading the cases into the raft, heard the raft launch around 2:00 a.m. on March 20th. Then silence. He spent 3 days in that engine room, slowly freezing, surviving only because he'd wrapped himself in every piece of insulation he could tear from the pipes. He tried to break down the door but didn't have tools or strength. The Coast Guard found them on March 23rd. By then, Vincent Drake, Nathan Cole, and Yuki Tanaka were dead. Captain Petrov had survived but suffered permanent brain damage from the combination of head trauma, alcohol poisoning, and hypothermia. He's never spoken coherently since. I documented everything Samuel told me. I wrote it in my medical report, flagged it as critical information for investigators. I expected federal agents would want to interview Samuel immediately, search for Drake, track down the cargo. Instead, 2 agents from Homeland Security arrived at the hospital 6 hours later. They took Samuel into custody without charges. They told me my report contained classified information and I was not to discuss the case with anyone. They confiscated my notes. The official investigation concluded Vincent Drake had died on board with the others. Nathan Cole had died from equipment-related injuries. The gunshot wound was reclassified as an accidental discharge during the heating system failure. The cargo containers Samuel described were never mentioned in any report. The Coast Guard's own photographs of the Arctic Dawn's deck, which clearly showed drag marks where the cases had been moved, were classified. Samuel Torres was held in federal custody for 19 months without charges. When he was finally released in October 2011, he'd signed documents preventing him from discussing anything related to the Arctic Dawn incident. He disappeared shortly after his release. His family hasn't seen him since November 2011. Captain Ivan Petrov lives in a nursing facility in Anchorage. He requires 24-hour care. His family was told his injury resulted from falling on an icy deck during the storm. The Arctic Dawn was sold at auction in 2012. All its equipment and logs were destroyed beforehand. Standard procedure for decommissioned vessels, according to the disposal company. I left the Coast Guard in 2013. I was never officially punished for my report about Samuel's testimony, but I was transferred 3 times in 18 months, always to remote stations, always away from any investigation work. I took the hint and resigned. I kept copies of my original medical notes, including every detail Samuel provided about Drake's plan, the cargo, the murders, and the pickup boat. I have photographs I took on my personal phone before they confiscated my equipment. Images showing the sabotaged heating system, the cut fuel pump bolts, the drag marks on the deck. If you worked in Dutch Harbor in 2010 and knew Vincent Drake, contact me. If you know anything about unmarked cargo containers in those waters, contact me. If you know where Samuel Torres is now, contact me. 3 men were murdered for illegal cargo worth millions. Their deaths were covered up and called accidents. The only witness was silenced and disappeared. And somewhere, someone is still moving radioactive materials through Alaska waters, killing anyone who interferes. The supply plane landed at Glacier Station on April 2, 2012, expecting to pick up 3 scientists after their winter research rotation. Instead, the pilot found 2 bodies and a 3rd scientist, Dr. Claire Novak, barricaded in the communications room with extensive documentation proving their deaths weren't accidents. Within 6 hours, federal agents arrived, seized everything, and declared the station off-limits. I know because I was the pilot, and I smuggled out the photos Dr. Novak begged me to take. Glacier Station was a climate research facility in northeastern Greenland, operated by an international consortium studying ice core samples and atmospheric data. During winter months, the station housed 3 scientists in complete isolation, no resupply flights from October through March, minimal satellite communication, absolute dedication required. The winter 2011-2012 team consisted of Dr. Claire Novak, a glaciologist from Canada, Dr. Anton Volkov, an atmospheric scientist from Russia, and Dr. James Patterson, a geochemist from the United States, All experienced polar researchers, all specifically selected for their ability to work in extreme isolation. Their research was routine, drilling ice cores, collecting atmospheric samples, monitoring climate patterns. Nothing controversial. Nothing that should have resulted in 2 deaths and a cover-up. But Dr. Patterson was also collecting other data. Data he wasn't supposed to have access to. Data that revealed something happening in Greenland that governments had agreed to keep secret. When I landed on April 2nd, Dr. Novak met me at the aircraft. She was emaciated, frostbitten, and terrified. She told me Dr. Volkov and Dr. Patterson were dead, and she would be next if she couldn't get evidence to safety. Inside the station, I found Volkov's body in the laboratory. Single gunshot wound to the chest. Patterson's body was in the storage room. 2 gunshot wounds, one to the abdomen, one to the head. Both men had been dead approximately 6 weeks, frozen solid by the station's temperature. Dr. Novak's story was documented in 147 pages of handwritten notes, along with data files, photographs, and recorded conversations. She'd been documenting everything since February 18th, when Patterson had told her and Volkov what he'd discovered. Patterson had been analyzing ice core samples dating back 800,000 years. Standard research. But he'd also been secretly analyzing modern atmospheric samples, air collected over the previous 6 months, looking for chemical signatures that shouldn't exist in Arctic environments. He found them, specific isotope ratios indicating underground nuclear tests, recent ones, within the past 2 years, located approximately 43 miles from Glacier Station, beneath the ice sheet. Patterson had previous experience with nuclear forensics. He'd worked at Los Alamos before moving into climate research. He recognized the signatures immediately. Fusion-based tests, sophisticated design, yields indicating weapon development rather than research. Someone was conducting secret nuclear tests under the Greenland ice sheet. Tests that violated international treaties, environmental agreements, and Arctic protection protocols. Tests that were invisible to traditional seismic monitoring because the ice absorbed most of the signals. Patterson told Volkov and Novak on February 18th. He showed them his data. He said he was going to report it through official channels as soon as communication improved in spring. On February 19th, a supply helicopter arrived. Unscheduled, no advance notice, 2 men claiming to be from the Research Consortium's logistics office. They said they needed to inspect the station's equipment and verify winter supplies. They stayed 4 hours. They asked detailed questions about the research being conducted. They examined Patterson's laboratory space, his computer, his sample storage. Patterson later told Novak he'd hidden his nuclear forensics data in mislabeled folders before they arrived. The helicopter left at 4:30 p.m. At 8:15 p.m., the station's satellite communication system failed, completely. Patterson tried to repair it for 2 days. He had engineering training, but the damage was sophisticated sabotage, not equipment failure. Someone had disabled it remotely. On February 23rd, another helicopter arrived. Different men. They came at 2 a.m. during a storm, lights off. Novak was awake working in the meteorology room. She watched through the window as 4 men in tactical gear entered the station. She heard shouting. Patterson was demanding to know who they were and what authority they had. Then gunshots, 2 shots in rapid succession. Novak ran to the communications room and barricaded herself inside. She heard more shouting. Volkov was fighting, then another shot, then silence. The men searched the station for 3 hours. They were looking for Patterson's data. They found his computer, his research files, his ice core samples. They took everything, but they didn't find the backup drive Patterson had given Novak 3 days earlier. A small external drive containing copies of everything, atmospheric analyses, isotope data, photographs of instrument readings, recorded calculations proving the nuclear tests. Patterson had told her if anything happened to him, she had to get the data to Dr. Frank Morrison at MIT. Morrison was a nuclear forensics expert who would understand the evidence and know who to contact. The men eventually tried to break into the communications room. Novak had wedged the door with equipment racks. They pounded on it, threatened her, told her to open it immediately. She refused. They tried forcing it for 20 minutes, then stopped. She heard them discussing options. One voice said they couldn't leave witnesses. Another said a third body would raise questions. A third voice said she'd freeze anyway. The station was isolated. Communication was down. No one would arrive for 6 weeks. Her death would look like she'd survived the winter but had died during an accident shortly before a rescue. They left at 5:47 a.m. She heard the helicopter depart. She survived it the next 38 days by rationing food, maintaining minimal heat, and documenting everything. She wrote out Patterson's findings in detail. She transcribed the data from the backup drive. She recorded every conversation she'd overheard. She also found Patterson's hidden journal. He'd been more thorough than she'd realized. He'd documented 3 underground tests, November 14, 2011, December 27, 2011, and January 34, 2012. He'd calculated their yields, 18 kilotons, 34 kilotons, and 51 kilotons respectively. He'd triangulated their approximate location using atmospheric dispersion models and trace particle analysis. He'd also identified the responsible nation based on specific isotope signatures unique to certain reactor designs. The information was in the journal, hidden in coded notes that Novak had to decipher. When I arrived on April 2nd, Novak gave me everything. She begged me to photograph Patterson's journal, the data printouts, her own documentation. She said federal agents would arrive within hours of her reporting the deaths, and everything would be confiscated and classified. She was right. I'd barely loaded the bodies when 3 helicopters appeared. Agents in civilian clothes, but military-bearing. They took custody of the station, ordered me to leave immediately, and told me the incident was now under federal jurisdiction. Novak was taken into protective custody. I was debriefed for 6 hours at Thule Air Base. They asked specifically about documents, data drives, photographs. I said I'd seen only bodies and a terrified scientist. I'd hidden my phone in the aircraft's wheel well before they searched me. Dr. Claire Novak was held at Thule for 3 weeks, then transferred to an undisclosed location. Her family was told she was receiving psychological treatment for trauma related to isolation and witnessing violent deaths. She was released in June 2012 with diagnosis of severe PTSD and a government pension for medical retirement. She never spoke publicly about what happened. She never published research again. She lives in rural Nova Scotia and refuses all contact with journalists or former colleagues. Dr. Patterson and Dr. Volkov's deaths were ruled murder-suicide. Official report claimed Volkov had psychological breakdown during isolation, killed Patterson, then killed himself. The gunshot evidence was somehow made to support this conclusion, despite requiring Volkov to shoot himself twice. Glacier Station was decommissioned in 2013. The facility was dismantled and removed. The research consortium dissolved, citing funding challenges. I have 43 photographs from my phone. Patterson's journal pages showing calculations, dates, and isotope ratios. Novak's handwritten documentation. The backup drive itself disappeared. Novak had it when agents took her into custody. But the photos show enough. Proof that someone is conducting secret nuclear weapon tests beneath Greenland's ice sheet. Proof that 2 scientists were murdered to protect that secret. If you worked at Glacier Station or the research consortium between 2010 and 2013, contact me. If you know anything about underground nuclear testing in Arctic regions, contact me. If you know where Dr. Claire Novak is and whether she's safe, contact me. Patterson and Volkov died trying to expose an international crime. Novak spent 38 days in isolation, surrounded by their frozen bodies, preserving evidence that governments wanted destroyed. I have that evidence, and I'm looking for someone with the authority and courage to do something with it. The tour bus went off the road at 11:53 p.m. on December 8, 2008, plunging 300 feet down a steep embankment in the Rocky Mountains. 17 passengers died, 8 survived with severe injuries. The official investigation concluded the driver, Gregory Walsh, had fallen asleep at the wheel during a snowstorm, but I was the highway maintenance supervisor who'd been reporting dangerous road conditions for 3 months, and I know the real reason that bus crashed. Deliberate negligence that saved the state $1.2 million in emergency repairs. The stretch of Highway 119 between Boulder and Nederland, Colorado, is 18 miles of winding mountain road with steep grades, sharp curves, and minimal guardrails. During winter, it's treacherous. My crew was responsible for maintaining that section, plowing, sanding, repairing guardrails, monitoring ice conditions. In September 2008, we discovered major structural problems. Heavy summer rains had caused erosion beneath the roadbed at mile marker 14.8. The asphalt was cracking, the shoulder was collapsing, the guardrail posts were pulling loose from weakened ground. I submitted an emergency repair request on September 23rd. The estimated cost was $1.2 million. The Colorado Department of Transportation denied it, citing budget constraints. They told me to monitor the situation and implement temporary measures. I installed warning signs. I reduced the speed limit from 45 to 35 in that section. I personally inspected the area every 4 days, documenting the progressive deterioration. By November, the shoulder had collapsed another 8 inches. The guardrail was held by only 4 of its original 12 posts. The roadbed cracks had widened to 3 inches. I submitted another emergency request, this time with photographs showing the danger. CDOT responded by approving $47,000 for temporary repairs. Basically, more warning signs and some reflective paint. No structural work, no guardrail reinforcement. They said permanent repairs would be included in the next fiscal year's budget, starting July 2009. I told them that section wouldn't survive the winter. I said the first major snow would complete the erosion and someone would die. I put it in writing. They sent a compliance officer to inspect my maintenance records. She found minor paperwork discrepancies, a few missing signatures, some dates entered incorrectly. She wrote me up for sloppy documentation and implied I was exaggerating the danger to increase my budget. On December 8th, we got 14 inches of snow in 6 hours. My crew worked the highway from 4 p.m. until midnight, plowing and sanding. We cleared everything except the worst curve at mile marker 14.8, the area with the structural damage. I'd put up additional warning signs and traffic cones, and I radioed CDOT dispatch to request temporary closure of that section. They denied the closure. They said I didn't have authority to close state highways without approval from Regional Command. I asked for Regional Command approval. They said Regional Command was unavailable until morning. At 11:53 p.m., a tour bus operated by Rocky Mountain Transport came around that curve going approximately 40 miles per hour. The driver, Gregory Walsh, 59, had been driving for 16 hours with one 30-minute break. He was exhausted, and the snow reduced visibility to near zero. The bus hit a patch of black ice exactly where the roadbed was weakest. The vehicle slid toward the guardrail. The guardrail collapsed completely. The posts pulled out of the eroded ground like they'd been stuck in sand. The bus went over the edge and rolled 300 feet down the embankment, crushing against trees and rocks. I was still on the highway when the call came in. My crew and I were first on scene. I'll never forget what we found. The bus was crumpled like a tin can. People were trapped inside, screaming. Some were already dead. Some were dying as we tried to reach them. Gregory Walsh survived. He was thrown clear during the first roll. He kept saying he'd been careful, he'd seen the warning signs, but the bus just slid and the guardrail gave way like paper. 17 people died that night. The youngest was 9 years old, a girl named Emma Foster, traveling with her family to visit grandparents for Christmas. The oldest was 73, Walter Kim, a retired postal worker. Everyone in between had names, families, lives that ended because the state chose not to spend money. The investigation started immediately. National Transportation Safety Board, Colorado State Patrol, CDOT's own internal review. I testified to all of them. I provided every document I'd created, the emergency repair requests from September and November, the photographs showing progressive deterioration, the emails where I'd warned about winter dangers, the radio logs from December 8th where I'd requested highway closure. I thought I was helping. I thought I was ensuring accountability and preventing future tragedies. Instead, I was fired. CDOT claimed I'd failed to properly maintain the highway section. They said I'd been repeatedly warned about documentation deficiencies but hadn't corrected them. They said the guardrail collapse resulted from my crew's failure to inspect and maintain the posts according to protocol. They blamed me for 17 deaths. The official NTSB report concluded Gregory Walsh's fatigue was the primary cause. The report mentioned the guardrail failure as a contributing factor, but found that proper maintenance might have prevented the guardrail collapse. The report specifically cited inadequate inspection and maintenance protocols by local highway crews. My name was in that report. My maintenance records were criticized. My emergency repair requests were characterized as routine maintenance concerns that did not clearly communicate critical safety issues. The families of the victims filed wrongful death lawsuits. Some sued Rocky Mountain Transport for driver fatigue. Some sued CDOT for negligent highway maintenance. All of them lost. The state argued that weather conditions were the primary cause, an act of God that couldn't have been prevented through reasonable precautions. The guardrail failure was unfortunate but not causally linked to the deaths because the bus would have gone off the road regardless due to the ice and driver fatigue. Rocky Mountain Transport settled privately with a few families for undisclosed amounts. CDOT paid nothing. Gregory Walsh was charged with 17 counts of vehicular manslaughter and served 4 years in prison. I've tried to work highway maintenance since then. No one will hire me. When potential employers check my references, they're told I was terminated for gross negligence that contributed to multiple fatalities. They're shown the NTSB report with my name highlighted. I'm working construction now. It's general labor. I'm 61 years old and I'll never get my career back, but I kept everything. Every emergency repair request I submitted. Every photograph showing the deteriorating roadbed and failing guardrail. Every email warning CDOT about the danger. The radio logs from December 8th proving I requested highway closure and was denied. The highway was repaired in February 2009. CDOT spent $1.4 million on emergency work, more than I'd requested in September. The new guardrail is rated for impacts up to twice the force that destroyed the old one. If you worked for CDOT in 2008 and know about budget decisions regarding Highway 119, contact me. If you're a family member of someone who died in that crash and want to know the full truth, contact me. If you're a government employee who's been pressured to ignore safety concerns for budget reasons, contact me. 17 people died because a state agency chose to save money rather than fix a known hazard. Their deaths were preventable, documented, and predicted. And the people who made that decision faced no consequences, while I lost everything for trying to protect the public. The guardrail that should have saved those lives cost $1.2 million. The state decided 17 lives weren't worth it.